What would you do if the very thing meant to protect your family became the reason they were hunted? Imagine a forest so ancient, so hungry, that it waits patiently for generations watching, whispering, promising wealth and power to those desperate enough to listen. And when the price finally comes due, it doesn't come for you. It comes for everyone you love. This is a story about twin sisters, a forgotten house, and something that should never have been disturbed. And if you're not already subscribed, you might want to fix that before we go any further. Trust me, some doors, once opened, can never be closed. And this story has a way of staying with people who don't finish it. So let me ask you this. What happens when a girl survives 7 days without food or water, cradling her dead twin sister's rotting corpse? And when you finally ask her how she's still alive, she smiles and says nothing? That's where this nightmare begins. But to understand the ending, we have to go back to the beginning. Back before the blood, before the black magic, before the djinn that would tear an entire family apart. Back to a night that started like any other for a police officer named Noir. The abandoned factory loomed against the darkened sky like a skeleton of forgotten industry. Rust clung to every surface, and the wind carried whispers through broken windows that sounded almost like voices calling out from another world. Noir stepped out of his patrol car, the yellow headlights cutting through the darkness, but doing little to push back the oppressive weight of the place. He was young, too young, perhaps, for the things he'd already seen in his career. A recent transfer from the city, he'd come to this quiet Indonesian village for one reason only: his twin sister Noor. She was the reason he was here tonight, at this god-forsaken hour, stepping over broken glass and discarded needles. The factory floor stretched before him, a maze of shadows and machinery long dead. And there, curled on a makeshift bed of cardboard beneath a rusted walkway, he found her. Noor. His other half. The person who should have been his equal, his partner in navigating this difficult world. Instead, she lay passed out, needle marks visible on her arm, her breathing shallow but present. She'd been using again. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 5th time. In the 2 months since Noir had transferred to this village, he'd pulled Noor from this exact spot 5 separate times. Each time he told himself it would be the last. Each time he was wrong. Noor, he called out, his voice echoing in the empty space. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then slowly finding his face. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips, sad, knowing, almost mocking. "You found me again," she whispered. "Of course I found you. I always find you." He helped her sit up, then handed her the container of food he'd brought. She ate slowly, mechanically, as if her body needed the sustenance, but her soul had long since stopped caring about survival. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, filled only by the soft hum of the engine and the weight of words neither of them wanted to say. But Noor, as always, broke the silence first. "You shouldn't have come back here," she said, her voice hollow. "You had a good job in the city, a real future. My future is wherever you are. That's exactly the problem." She turned to look at him, her eyes surprisingly clear despite the drugs still in her system. "You gave up everything for me, Noir. Everything. And what do? I keep ending up in places like that factory, convincing myself that the pills and the needles make the pain go away. Mom's death hit you hard. I understand." "No," she interrupted. "You don't understand. You could never understand. While you were building your career in the city, I was here, watching her fade away day by day. I was the one holding her hand when she took her last breath. I was the one who had to tell myself that it wasn't my fault." Noir gripped the steering wheel tighter. The familiar guilt washed over him, the guilt of being absent, of choosing career over family, of leaving his twin to face their mother's death alone. "I'm here now," he said quietly. "I'm not going anywhere. That's what scares me," Noor replied, "because I think something is coming, something bad, and I don't think you can stop it." Before he could ask what she meant, she turned away, staring out the window at the passing darkness. When they arrived at her apartment, Noor didn't say goodbye. She simply got out of the car and walked inside without looking back. Noir watched her go, the familiar weight of helplessness settling in his chest. His phone buzzed, a message from dispatch. A body had been found in an abandoned house on the outskirts of the village. Reporters and other units were on their way, but Noir was closest. He should have gone home. He should have rested. But something in the message, the location, the circumstances, pulled at him. He drove toward the abandoned house, not knowing that his life was about to change forever. A house stood at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by overgrown vegetation that seemed to reach toward its walls like grasping fingers. Even from a distance, Noir could feel something wrong about the place. The air was too still. The silence was too complete. Other units were supposedly on their way, but when Noir arrived, he found himself alone. He radioed dispatch, requesting permission to enter, but was told to wait. Backup was 5 minutes out. 5 minutes. In his line of work, 5 minutes could mean the difference between catching a killer and losing a trail forever, and something about this house made him feel like time was already running out. He approached slowly, studying the structure. The front door was secured with a chain and 2 padlocks, one locked, one hanging open. Someone had been here recently. Someone had left in a hurry. Noir made a decision. He drew his weapon and, with a quick strike, broke the remaining lock. The chain fell away and the door creaked open, revealing darkness beyond. Inside, the air was thick with dust and something else, something faint but unmistakable. The smell of death. He stepped over the threshold. Almost immediately, his foot caught on something. Looking down, he saw a line of salt spread across the floor, forming a barrier between the entrance and the interior of the house, a protection spell. Noir had seen these before in rural villages, old superstitions, folk magic meant to ward off spirits or contain evil. But this one looked fresh. Whoever had placed it here was trying to keep something in, not out. He pushed the salt aside with his boot and continued forward. The walls were covered in strange symbols, crude drawings, ancient letters, diagrams that hurt to look at for too long. Black magic. Someone had turned this house into something else. A prison, a temple, a cage. He moved deeper into the darkness, and then he heard it. A sound from above. Footsteps, breathing. Something was on the second floor. Noir climbed the stairs slowly, weapon raised, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But he couldn't. Not when there might be someone who needed help. He found the source of the smell in a small bedroom at the end of a narrow hallway. The room was empty except for a figure sitting in the corner. A young woman, perhaps in her 20s, her back against the wall, her eyes vacant. And in her lap, lay another young woman. But this one was clearly, unmistakably dead. Her skin had begun to decay, her features distorted by time and neglect. She had been dead for days, maybe a week. And yet the living girl simply sat there holding the corpse, staring at nothing. Noir approached slowly, his weapon still raised but his heart beginning to race for a different reason now. "Can you hear me?" he asked. "My name is Noir. I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you." The girl didn't respond. He reached out and touched her shoulder. She screamed. The sound tore through the silence, a primal, desperate wail that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. Then she collapsed, unconscious, leaving Noir standing alone in that terrible room with 2 bodies, one dead, one barely alive. The investigation that followed would change everything Noir thought he knew about the world. The living girl was named Sia. The dead girl was Tina. They were twin sisters, identical in every way except for a small birthmark on Sia's palm. Their father had died years ago in a car accident. Their mother had passed away from cancer just a year prior. But the details that emerged from the forensics report painted a much stranger picture. Tina had been dead for 7 days. 7 days. And yet Sia had been sitting there, in that abandoned house, the entire time without food, without water, without any apparent means of survival. The forensic doctor was baffled. By all medical logic, Sia should have been dead too, or at the very least severely dehydrated and malnourished. Instead, aside from the psychological trauma, she was physically fine. "How is this possible?" Noir asked. The doctor shook his head. "It isn't. Not by any science I understand. Either someone was feeding her, or something else is at work here." Something else. Noir didn't believe in the supernatural. He was a man of evidence, of logic, of procedures and protocols. But as he stood in that hospital hallway watching through the window as Sia lay unconscious in her bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. And then Sia's eyes opened. Noir entered the room cautiously. She seemed calm now, her earlier hysteria replaced by an eerie stillness. But as he approached, she suddenly sat up, her eyes widening in terror. She pointed at the curtain behind him. There, she whispered. It's there. Noir turned quickly, but the curtain revealed nothing, just an empty wall. When he leapt back at Sia, she was unconscious again. Had she ever really woken up? Or had he imagined the whole thing? He was still trying to process what had happened when he noticed something on the floor beside her bed. A small object, wet and discolored, like it had been inside her body. He picked it up with gloved hands. It was a talisman, a small leather pouch containing a folded photograph. Noir opened it carefully and felt his breath catch. The photograph was of Sia's uncle. Why would Sia have a photograph of her uncle inside a talisman that had been inside her stomach? What kind of black magic was at work here? The questions multiplied faster than Noir could process them, and the deeper he dug, the darker the truth became. Sia and Tina's uncle was dead. Noir found this out when he visited the family's estate, a grand old house on the outskirts of the village that had clearly seen better days. The woman who answered the door introduced herself as Faiza, the uncle's wife. She was pale, nervous, clearly hiding something. And when Noir delivered the news that her husband was dead, that his body had been found under circumstances that could only be described as supernatural, she didn't seem surprised. She seemed relieved. The grandmother, Nazma, was another story. When Noir told her that one of her granddaughters was dead and the other was in the hospital, she didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She simply stared at him with eyes that held secrets older than the house itself. You should have left them where they were, she said quietly. Noir didn't understand. Left them? They were prisoners in that house. They were dying. You don't know what you've done. Nazma's voice was barely a whisper now. You've released something that should never have been free. Before Noir could respond, a scream echoed from somewhere deeper in the house. He ran toward the sound, weapon drawn, and found Faiza's daughter, Ida, standing in the kitchen, trembling. The girl pointed at a window, her face pale with terror. She was there, Ida stammered. I saw her. I saw Tina. She was standing right behind me in the reflection. But when I turned around, she was gone. Noir checked the window. Nothing. But as he turned back to comfort Ida, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The girl wasn't lying. In the darkened glass of the window, he could see a faint reflection just for a moment of a figure standing behind him. A young woman. Gaunt. Hollow-eyed. Staring. Then it was gone. That night, Noir returned to his quarters at the police station, exhausted and more confused than ever. The case didn't make sense. The pieces didn't fit. And every time he thought he was getting closer to the truth, something new and impossible happened. He was in the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face, when the mirror behind him began to fog. But he hadn't touched the hot water. Slowly, he turned around. The mirror was clear, but the cabinet behind him had opened on its own. Then it closed. Then opened again. Noir grabbed his gun and checked every corner of the small space. Nothing. No one. But as he turned to leave, he felt something brush against his arm. Something cold. Something that made every hair on his body stand on end. He spun around, firing blindly into the darkness above. The shots echoed through the station, bringing other officers running. When they found him, Noir was standing alone in his quarters, his gun still raised, his breathing ragged. There was something here, he insisted, something in the attic space. But the attic was empty, just rats and dust and shadows. The senior officer who arrived to investigate the shooting gave Noir a look that was equal parts pity and contempt. This was exactly what he expected from city police, transferred to the village. Paranoia, hallucinations, an inability to handle the quiet. You need rest, the senior officer said, not unkindly. This case is getting to you. Noir wanted to argue, but what could he say? That a ghost had attacked him? That the dead twin was haunting the living? That something impossible was happening in this quiet little village? He kept his mouth shut and focused on the case. The next breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A forensic analysis of the talisman found in Sia's stomach revealed traces of substances used in black magic rituals, herbs, animal blood, symbols drawn in human bone ash. And the photograph inside wasn't just of Sia's uncle. It was part of a binding spell. Someone had been controlling Sia from the inside out. The question was, who? Noir's investigation led him to Sia and Tina's family history. Their father had been a wealthy man who had built his fortune from nothing. How? The villagers spoke of rumors, dealings with spirits, bargains with jinns, wealth gained at a terrible price. When the father died, his fortune should have passed to his wife and daughters. Instead, it had been absorbed by his mother and brother, the very people who should have protected the orphan twins. The grandmother, Nazma, had locked the girls away in that abandoned house. She had starved them. She had left them to die. But why? The answer, when it came, was more horrifying than Noir could have imagined. Noir received the call. In the middle of the night, a frantic report from an officer at the station. He arrived to find her body in the middle of the road, struck by a car as she ran blindly from something. In her final moments, she had been screaming about a presence, something that had come for her, something that would come for everyone. Before her death, Faiza had begun to reveal the truth. She had been the one who called the police about the twins, and not out of guilt, but out of terror. She had seen what the family was dealing with. She had tried to protect her daughter Ida from the same fate, but it was too late. The entity that the family had tried to control was now controlling them, and it was working its way through the bloodline, one death at a time. Noir's partner in the investigation, a sergeant named Lokman, was a deeply religious man who understood the supernatural in ways that Noir couldn't. He recognized the signs, the talismans, the salt barriers, the symbols on the walls. Someone bound a jinn to this family, Lokman explained. Generations ago, probably. It was passed down as an inheritance. But something went wrong. What do you mean wrong? The jinn is supposed to serve the master. But if the master loses control, the jinn takes what it's owed. And what it's owed is blood. Noir still didn't fully believe. He wanted answers that made sense, evidence he could hold in his hands. But as he looked at the pattern of deaths, Sia and Tina's father, their mother, their uncle, now Faiza, he couldn't deny that something was connecting them all. And then Sia woke up. Of a hospital. Sia finally told her story. She and Tina had been imprisoned by their grandmother for over a year. Locked in that abandoned house, starved, forgotten. Tina had died 7 days before Noir found them. Sia had survived because she stopped there. I didn't survive because I was strong, she whispered. I survived because something was keeping me alive, something that wanted me to get out. The grandmother, Nazma, hadn't been trying to starve the girls to death out of cruelty. She had been trying to contain something. The salt barrier, the talismans, the isolation, all of it was meant to keep a jinn trapped with the twins, unable to escape. When Noir broke the lock and entered the house, he had broken the containment. The jinn was free, and now it was coming for everyone who had ever been part of the family. The final confrontation came faster than anyone expected. Noir received word that both Noor and Ida had disappeared from the hospital. The only place they could be was the abandoned house where everything had started. He drove there with Lokman, the two of them moving through the darkness with weapons drawn and prayers on their lips. Inside the house, they found a scene from a nightmare. Noor was suspended in mid-air, held aloft by invisible hands. And standing beside her, controlling the forces that gripped her, was Sia. Not a victim, a master. The jinn answered to Sia. It had always answered to Sia. She was the heir to her father's bargain, the one who had inherited the ring that gave her control over the supernatural entity. And now she was using it for revenge. Noir tried to reason with her, tried to remind her of the innocent people she was hurting, but Sia had long since crossed the line between victim and villain. The power had corrupted her, turned her grief and rage into something monstrous. She turned the jinn on Noir. What followed was a battle not of weapons but of wills. Noir had never been a religious man, but he remembered the prayers his mother had taught him as a child. He remembered the verses his partner Lokman had shared, and as the invisible force closed round his throat, choking the life from him, he began to recite Ayat al-Kursi, the throne verse. The words had power, not because of magic, but because of faith, and as Noir spoke them, he could feel the grip loosening. The jinn was weakening. Sia screamed in rage, her control over the entity faltering. The ring on her finger began to burn, the ancient symbol etched into its surface glowing with an inner fire. Noir saw his chance. He lunged forward, grabbing Sia's hand and wrenching the ring from her finger. The moment it left her skin, it burst into flames. The jinn howled a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and then it was gone. Sia collapsed to the floor, and from above, a heavy wooden beam broke free and crashed down, striking Noir with enough force to drive him into unconsciousness. When Noir woke, it was 2 weeks later. He was in a hospital bed, Noor sitting beside him, holding his hand. She was clean now, off the drugs, attending counseling, trying to rebuild the life she had nearly lost. The case was officially closed. The deaths had been blamed on natural causes and accidents. The supernatural elements had been quietly buried in reports that no one would ever read, but some questions remained unanswered. Sia's body had never been found. After the ring was destroyed, she had simply vanished. Whether she was dead or simply gone, no one could say. And Noor, in the quiet moments when she thought Noir wasn't listening, still whispered prayers of protection. The darkness hadn't been destroyed. It had only been driven back. But before we reach the end, there's one more thing you need to know. Some stories have clean endings. Good triumphs over evil. The monster is slain. The survivors ride off into the sunset. This isn't one of those stories. Weeks after the confrontation at the abandoned house, Ida, the sole survivor of her family, boarded a bus to leave the village forever. She sat alone, her eyes hollow from grief, her mind still trying to process everything she had lost. And in the seat behind her, reflected for just a moment in the window, a figure appeared. Sia, smiling, waiting. The jinn had been bound to the ring, but the ring had been passed down through generations. And somewhere in that family's dark history, there was another heir, another master. The story hadn't ended. It had simply moved to its next chapter. So here we are, at the end of a story that isn't really an end at all. A family destroyed by a bargain made generations ago. A jinn that waits patiently for new masters. A cycle of blood and power that continues no matter how many times we try to break it. Noir survived. Noor survived. They found peace, or at least the possibility of peace. But in the shadows, in the spaces between what we see and what we fear, something ancient continues to wait. These stories never truly die. They just find new people to haunt. And if you made it this far, thank you for staying with me through the darkness. This kind of story isn't easy to tell, and it isn't easy to hear. But some things need to be witnessed, even if we can't fully understand them. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, if you found yourself looking over your shoulder while you listened, or checking the reflections in windows, then you understand why these tales matter. They remind us that the world is bigger than what we can see, and that some doors should never be opened. If you feel like this story deserves to be shared, consider leaving a like or a comment. Not because it helps the algorithm, but because sometimes sharing our fears is the only way to make them smaller. And if you're not already subscribed, well, let's just say there are more stories where this came from. Stories that deserve to be told. Stories that need witnesses. Until next time, stay safe. Stay curious. And remember, not every inheritance is a blessing. Some gifts come with prices that can never fully be paid. This has been a story about family, about power, about the darkness that passes from generation to generation like a curse we can't escape. It's about the lengths people will go to protect the ones they love, even if it means imprisoning them. It's about the fine line between savior and monster, between victim and villain. Most of all, it's about the things we inherit from those who came before us. Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's trauma, and sometimes it's something much, much worse. Sia inherited her father's bargain with a jinn. Noor inherited her mother's pain. Noir inherited the guilt of a brother who wasn't there when his sister needed him most. And Ida inherited the silence of a family that kept too many secrets. We all carry something from those who came before us. The question is, what will we pass on to those who come after? If this story made you think about your own inheritance, whether spiritual, emotional, or something else entirely, then it's done what stories are meant to do. It's made you reflect. It's made you wonder. And in a world full of distractions, sometimes wonder is exactly what we need. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for not turning away when the darkness got too thick. I'll see you in the next story. Until then, take care of each other. and watch out for open doors. You never know what might walk through.